Hello, quilters! I'm Debbie Brown, one of the designers of Cutie Patterns. All Cutie Patterns begin with 16 fat eighths of fabric, plus some background, borders, or whatever other fabrics are needed to complete the quilt. This quilt is cross-stitch, and I used Garden Gatherings fabrics by Primitive Gatherings for Moda. In this video, I'm going to show you how I machine quilted the cross-stitch cutie pattern on my home sewing machine. Quilting on a home sewing machine can be scary, but with some care, it can be fun and turn out great. I chose Tan Confetti thread, which is a 50 weight cotton, to stitch in the needle, and I've chosen a matching DecoBob for the bobbin. They join together beautifully. They're not exactly the same color, but this thread is so thin that when you layer the thin thread with the thicker thread, they look like the same color. There's just not a lot of presence there. It makes a beautiful stitch on the back of the quilt, and your bobbin lasts longer when you use a thinner thread. I'm going to be stitching continuous curve in the 9 patch here, and it's going to be a heavily contrasting thread because the tan is going to contrast heavily with the black, and it's going to blend in perfectly with the orange or the gold, whatever color you look at. But overall, this tan was the right choice. My quilt is basted, and I'm starting in the middle of the quilt, and I do like the middle block, and then I do the blocks around the middle block, then the blocks around those middle blocks, then the blocks around those until I reach the end of the quilt. I'm going to start by positioning my needle over the corner of the 9 patch, needle down, needle up, and move the quilt aside. I'm going to use the top thread to pull up the bobbin thread so that both of the threads are above the quilt but below the foot. And now I'm going to take a couple small stitches, kind of a tack stitch, over, back and forth. And that is my knot. When I get started, I'm going to hold on to my thread, my Batt Scooter, and my Batt Scooter, and I'm going to stitch a curve from corner to corner. Now I could do this with a ruler, stitching against a curved ruler to make this completely accurate, but the goal of this quilt for me is to relax and make it simple and fun to quilt. I can stitch a reasonably curvy curve, but ruler work would be fine on here as well. I want this to be a fuss-free quilt. Just sit and enjoy the quilting for the joy of quilting. So I stitch from corner to corner. Now I'm going to stitch from corner to corner over, above into the gold, and then down below into the next gold. And I pause at each corner. Let me cut this thread out. So I'm stitching a curve from corner to corner of each block, pausing in each corner, and I went over one, under one, and over one, and when I come back I'm going under one, over one, and under one. And that helps me to make sure that they meet in the middle. Because if I do a curve here, curve, 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 and then come back with curve, 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 I might not hit that exact spot, but here the lines will cross. And once I've done all of those, I'm curving down here, and I'm going to go across and back again. Down to the bottom and over one. Now I'm going to stitch the curves up and back down the same way I did the cross ones. So one to the left, one to the right, one to the left, and I'm going to do the same thing up and down this next row, column. And now all I'm doing is stitching a curve from corner to corner along the edges all the way up one side and back to the beginning. I love the way that looks. It's not perfect, and I'm fine with it. I love the way it looks overall. I'm not looking for the perfection of each individual line. Now, before I cut my thread here, I'm going to continue and stitch ribbon candy all the way around this area around my 9 patch. So I don't stitch corners. This is a rectangle here, and a rectangle here, and a rectangle across the top, and a rectangle down the side. So I'm going to stitch ribbon candy across here in this rectangle. Then I'm going to change directions to up and down when I get to the next rectangle. No corners. So now I've finished with that entire up and down rectangle, and I'm ready to turn sideways and stitch across. So I'm going to stitch my ribbon candy up and down, but over. Now I've finished this, I'm going to stitch ribbon candy across, but going up the next piece of fabric. And now I'm going to stitch ribbon candy up and down, going across to the left to finish this border. finish my knot, I took a couple extra stitches at the end. Now I'm lifting up my presser foot, pulling the entire quilt away about 8 inches because I want a long bobbin thread. I'm going to come back to that corner, needle down, needle up, and use the top thread to catch that long bobbin thread underneath. I'm now going to trim everything flush to the fabric, and that knot will hold. Doesn't that block look great? I'm doing this block 30 times, the same stitching on all 30 blocks of the quilt, but what's great, the quilt is well basted and I can move from block to block to block from the center block, moving out, and only have to worry about quilting one block at a time, or one shape at a time, one curve at a time, one rectangle at a time, one square at a time. Now that I've finished quilting all of the blocks, it's time for the border. Now, often on a quilt like this with a border, it's a heavy print, so that whatever you quilt in there doesn't matter. I'll quilt meandering or loops or something really simple because you're never going to see it. Since this line of fabric is all shirtings, they're all pretty small tonal prints, and you'll be able to see it on this pink. So I decided that I want to quilt more of this. So these are the pumpkin seeds that I stitched, or the continuous curve that I stitched inside of the 9 patch of the block, and I decided I'm going to stitch pumpkin seeds, but toward the side. I'm going to turn them around a little bit, and I'm going to stitch them free motion. Now in the block I didn't have to mark anything because I stitched where the seam lines were for each of the squares and each of the rectangles, but in this border I don't have anything, any seam lines other than where I've sewn on the 4 borders, you know, the seam sewing it to the quilt. So I grabbed a 1-inch stencil. Originally I grabbed a 2-inch stencil to make 2-inch squares out here and to make pumpkin seeds, but honestly it was too big, and I chose to take it out and start over again with a 1-inch stencil. Now a 1-inch stencil is going to fit really nicely because each of the blocks are 10 inches, and I can line up the stencil, one line with the bottom of the block, one line with the top of the block, take my pounce pad and swipe over it, and it transfers that grid design. So I love doing the free motion quilting once everything is marked. I mark a little bit, and then once I finish stitching this, I will come up and I will mark the next section and stitch that, and then I will move up and mark the next section and stitch that. So I'm using that same tan thread. I'm going to start here, and I'm going to put 1 curve in every box. So I'm going to stitch a curve going up. So it's a 1/4 of a circle is now stitched in that box. And I'm going to stitch another of a 1/4 circle back down. These are not computer perfect. These are what I can do, which is far from perfect. And then I'm going to stitch a 1/4 of a circle up and a 1/4 of a circle down. I don't think of these as half circles because by the time I finish an entire half circle, it gets really strange looking. So I find I can do better if I do 1 curve, 2 curve, 1 curve, 2 curve, 1 curve, 2 curve. Now this is a 5-inch border, 5.5, yeah, it's a 5-inch border. So I'm going to be stitching all the way to the end, but not over the end. So I'm going to end up, so up, down, up, down, up. And now I can come back and make another curve by going down, and it's going to make a leaf or a petal in each one. An orange peel, a pumpkin seed, a wine glass, whatever you've had this heard this referred to as. And while I'm still in the same place, I'm going to now stitch a curve going down. So I stitched like a frown to start with, and now I'm going to stitch a smile to start with. A curve and a curve. A curve and a curve. A curve. And now I'm going to stitch back again. The next, I want to start stitching down here, which is 2 inches down, and I'm going to do kind of a little sneaky stitch in the ditch here, and stitch again. I'm doing that over this entire border. I'm listening to a really great book in my headphones, so I can quilt a long time happily. And I will keep making these pumpkin seeds, orange peels, wine glasses, whatever you call them. I can keep making those until the whole border's done. Be sure to like this video and hit the subscribe button. Head on over to DebbieBrownQuilts.com and subscribe to my newsletter so you won't miss any quilting goodness. Thanks for watching. Hi, I'm Debbie Brown of DebbieBrownQuilts.com. Do you have a stack of quilt tops just waiting to be quilted? Are you afraid to ruin them if you try to quilt them yourself? This is the class you've been waiting for. For the first time, I teach the techniques I share in my sold-out machine quilting classes to you at home. Quilting Essentials, First Steps to Free Motion Quilting, has been thoroughly tested and is finally ready for you. In more than 3 hours of video over 10 lessons, I cover topics like stitch length, edge-to-edge quilting, tying knots, and 10 different free motion quilting patterns. You can practice these on small quilt sandwiches, panels, your own unfinished quilt tops, or on one of the 4 patterns included in the class. Enroll now and go from "I can't do this" to "look what I did now."